Excellency, the President of Trinidad and Tobago, Your Excellency, the former Prime Minister of Nepal, my distinguished colleagues on this panel, Dr Abdul Basit Syed, from India originally, who is responsible for this brilliant forum, as also a worldwide audience of people who are interested, especially from the student community. It really is an honor to be included in this panel, which boasts so many people of high distinction that it almost gives me an inferiority complex to be among them. The subject we have been given to discuss is trade for peace. And I'd like to begin by posing the question as to whether the more usual expression, peace for trade, is in contradiction to the proposition before the House, which is trade for peace. Of course, it is clear from the experience of all the countries, the G193, as the president of Trinidad and Tobago told us, that if there is peace, then trade follows as day the night. But the more complicated issue is whether trade can lead to peace. For if trade leads to peace, then we get onto a virtuous circle where peace leads to trade and trade leads to peace. We saw in the horrors of the 20th century, which were marked by two devastating world wars, that almost the first thing that happens when war is declared between countries or groups of countries, it is trade that is blocked. And this blocking of trade aggravates rather than resolves the problems that led to war in the first place. Our own experience in India has been that when there are wars that take place with our neighbors, whether it is with Pakistan or with China, the disruption that this causes takes decades sometimes, and years in other cases, to find resolution. But invariably, if trade links are maintained, then it leads to not merely goods exchanges or services exchanges, but also, most importantly, to people exchanges. I think in my part of the world, we suffer very greatly from having stereotypes in our minds about our neighbors. And I think this is also true of our neighbors about us. And this makes it possible to cut trade and economic relations generally as the first reaction to disappointment on the political, foreign policy, or defense fronts. I regard this as extremely self-defeating. For when trade and economic links get disrupted, it only leads to the situation getting aggravated and the problem not getting resolved. We have had some very tense moments in India-Pakistan relations, and I will come to India-China relations in a minute. Between India and Pakistan, when we did have completely open trade in the immediate aftermath of independence, then perhaps 90% of Pakistan's exports were to India. Of course, diversification since then would have resulted in India becoming a much smaller market. But I still imagine that 20 to 30% of Pakistan's exports could go to India, and that there would be a quantum leap in Indian exports to Pakistan, because many of the things that Pakistan imports at much higher cost from the rest of the world would be much more easily, quickly, and cheaply supplied from India. And as I said earlier, because there are very strong linguistic and cultural links between the two countries, the two traders who come together, the importer and the exporter, in whichever country they may be, they find it feasible to talk in their respective mother tongues to each other, to enjoy each other's company, to renew their familiarity with the culture of the other country. And these are assets of invaluable importance as building blocks for peace and understanding and harmony between countries who have problems between them and the tensions that follow. Unfortunately, at the present juncture, all trade between India and Pakistan is banned. And I think this is to the harm of both our countries. Also, I think it comes in the way of the kind of normalization of the ethos which is necessary to take up extremely difficult diplomatic and political connections in order to resolve our mutual problems. Now, in these circumstances, I think we have to get out of the vicious circle of banning trade because we have tensions between our two countries, and move towards having peace between our countries by encouraging trade, which has a human dimension, which I think matters far more than merely the economic benefits that flow from countries buying goods that they desire from the other country, and buying goods and selling goods which they are surplus in to the other country. And in this connection, I would say that it is unfortunate if a transit country stops trade between its two neighbors, as is happening on our subcontinent. And therefore, the relaxing of India-Pakistan trade must also involve the relaxing of curbs on Afghanistan's trade with India, and as a result of that, the trade of Central Asia with India. If there is trade and other economic relations between India and Pakistan, it would blossom into trade and economic relations between India and Afghanistan, and India and many Central Asian countries, that would give both India and all these countries, including Pakistan, the opportunity of diversifying their contacts with each other, so that the subcontinent becomes a net contributor to global trade instead of bringing about a net deficit in global trade. Now, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would like to turn to India-China relations. After the 1962 fracas between India and China, we broke off all trade and economic relations with the People's Republic of China. Then 26 years wasted because we were in confrontation with each other. My boss at the time, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, took the very bold step of becoming the first Prime Minister of India in 26 years to visit Beijing. And the outcome of that visit has been not only 30 years of peace and tranquility between India and the PRC, the People's Republic of China, it has also led to such a remarkable expansion of trade and other economic relations between our two countries that China is today the second largest export destination for India. Now, if we were to cut off economic and trade relations with China because of the problems on the military front that we had at about this time last year, then it would amount to cutting our nose to spite our face. We have taken measures against China in the economic sphere as a kind of retaliation for what has unfortunately happened on our northern borders in the last 12 months or so. But the relationship is so strong that the decline in trade between the period before May, June last year and today is marginal compared to the total trade. It's not only that China is a very important destination for our exports, it is also a very important source of our imports. And you don't import unless you need that import. Foreign exchange is always precious, and you conserve it if you can. But nevertheless, we find that it is to the advantage of our own economic growth that we have a buoyant import relationship with China, although the balance of trade is heavily weighted in favor of China. But our balance of trade with the United States is heavily weighted in our favor. So in the world as a whole, one should look at the totality of the balance of trade, not at the balance of trade with respect to any one country. And of course, keeping Bangladesh in mind, I would say that India's balance of trade with Bangladesh will always be in our favor. But the more there is a resumption of connectivity through Bangladesh to our northeast, which lies also to the northeast of Bangladesh, it will be to the benefit of the capital account of Bangladesh and result in the balance of payments being in far greater equilibrium than the balance of trade. In the light of this, which is relevant to ourselves in this part of the world, I would like to conclude by saying yes, a big yes to trade for peace, but adding that please note that trade for peace can lead to peace for trade, and therefore we are in a virtuous circle if we begin somewhere, and beginning with trade for peace is a good point to start at. My grateful thanks to all of you for the patience with which you have listened to me. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to conclude with the slogan that we always use in India, Jai Hind, which means victory to India. Thank you very much.